Good morning, everyone. Guys, today we are going to talk about the UK riots, and we're going to talk about, is it legal to still, to still go to a protest? Because there's a lot of information out there, and I was really shocked that you can get now prosecuted, or as I understand it, because I'm still a little bit unsure as the exact law, but you can get prosecuted now just for attending one of these things. Also, we're going to talk about, excuse me, we're going to talk a little bit more about Ukraine because the things there are just escalating further and further. And I'm going to read you what the Russian nuclear doctrine actually says, because as we push further and further forwards, and as the Ukrainians push further into Russia, that raises the likelihood of them using a nuclear weapon. And they've said this, and this has been their, their structure of using nuclear weapons since 2010. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But before we start, guys, I just want to give you two examples, of why I feel the next protests in the UK are going to be a lot worse. When you're doing, if you're in the military, for example, and you're working in a built-up area, now, they always teach you to, if you need to take a building, you always need to go in from the top floor. Now, of course, it happens when you have to go in from the bottom floor. But the reason you always go in from the top floor is that it gives people somewhere to run. It gives some people an escape. It gives people, a way out. What you don't want to do when you're fighting in a built-up area is you don't want people trapped on the top floor because they've got nowhere to go and they will fight till the very end. And you don't want that. You want people to run off because, you want to take the ground. You're not really interested in the people. So that's the, I guess that's the military. I guess that's the military doctrine. That's why the military, you've seen them all, people fast roping into the tops of buildings. And yes, it does look cool, but there's a reason for it. Also, if you have a boiling pot and you don't let that steam evaporate, you just put a top on it, put your lid on it, and you bolt it down as tight as you can. And that pan, it keeps, you keep the same heat on that pan. At some point, that pan is going to explode. It's inevitable. And that will be a lot worse than, letting this steam off. And that's what I feel is happening in the United Kingdom at the moment with this mass suppression of people's opinions. There's a lot of people and they're still angry, and people are watching these things unfold on the news and they're seeing them in real time. And I think if it wasn't for platforms like like X just saying, look, we're not gonna censor anything, we wouldn't even know that these things are happening. And I'll click yesterday's video when I spoke about we all need to talk about things. Put this in your family situation when you've got that person in your family. Your family are not dealing with him. Nobody's dealing with the problem. You're just trying to hide the problem, and then when anybody pokes the problem, it just flares up even worse because nobody's dealing with the problem. Guys, we need to deal with the problem. There's no, this is not going away. And like that boiling pot, I feel, the lid may have been tightened on at the moment, but that pot is still boiling, guys. Okay, believe me. So let's talk about Ukraine for a moment. In fact, what we're going to do, we'll do Ukraine first, guys. Let me share this with you. How do I do that? I totally missed it. Anyway. So which one is it? This one. So this screen here, guys, I'll put the link in the description. But here you've got it, 10:32 this morning. Watch Ukrainian soldiers remove. Oh, something else has come up. Hang on. Watch Ukrainian soldiers remove Russian flag from council building. We're continuing to get some more video footage and pictures from inside Russia. In the latest clip, you can see two soldiers who appear to be dressed in Ukrainian uniform in, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that word, guys, a village in the Kursk region. The pair can be seen removing a Russian flag from the side of a council building. And of course, I'm going to assume they're going to put the, the Ukrainian flag up there. Right, guys, let me just read this because this has just popped up. Timeline, how did Ukraine's cross-border offensive begin? Right, so this began on the 6th of August. Right, okay. Okay, that's nothing we don't know on this channel. But what we see there, guys, is this, this incursion into Russia. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the more the Ukrainians have got momentum now. So for those of you who are, you see things on the news about military generals saying, yeah, we've got momentum, we've got the initiative. What momentum is when you take a place and then you manage to get troops in and everything works. And then you're like, right, those guys are ready. We can push forwards. And then you push forwards into another place. And once that momentum started, it's very easy for that to gather pace. Do I think this is going to be, the guys are going to be able to push up to Moscow? Absolutely not. But what this has done, it's given the Ukrainians a hugely needed morale boost. It's shown them that, they can push into Russia. They can take villages inside Russia, and their troops do have the capacity to push through when necessary, because I think it's been kind of a psychological block for the Ukrainians up until this point. Now, let's look at this from the Russian side then, okay? You've got, and again, these are non-confirmed. I said this yesterday, guys, absolutely non-confirmed, but the videos I've seen that have soldiers operating in and around that area are predominantly with British and American accents. Now, I don't know if that footage is correct. I genuinely don't know, guys. But if it is, let's just go with that. And let's look at the perception of that, because some of the Russians will be perceiving that as real. So remember, guys, all right, the reality doesn't really matter as much as the perception of that reality. So from the Russian side of this, you've got NATO-trained troops now pushing into their ground. You've got the Ukrainians pulling down Russian flags on Russian buildings, and potentially, I've not seen it yet, guys, but I'm going to assume they're going to put Ukrainian flags up. And I said when this first started, didn't I? And some people were saying, "Oh, that'll never happen." I said, "Look, if the Ukrainians can, hold a sham election there, and guys, okay." By sham election, I mean an election when you're under occupation is a sham election, all right? So the Russians have done this, so the Ukrainians would only be doing what Putin's doing and only be claiming the same as Putin. So Putin has no, Putin can't say, oh no, the elections are sham because they're under occupation. All right, Vladimir, what about Donetsk, Crimea? What about all the rest of those places? So you see where I'm going with that, guys, all right? That's the reality of the situation. Now, that's from the Russian side of it. They're seeing all this happening. The Russians know, and I've said this many times, the Russians know that the Russian infantry can't take back them villages. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the training. They don't have they have the manpower, but a lot of people say, oh, the Russians have, the Russians have 100 million soldiers, or whatever, a standing army of 1 million. That's okay, but can they operate sufficiently? No, they can't, because they're just normal people who are being put in uniform, and that they won't stand any chance against a trained unit, a trained military. Like if some of these, British and Americans have done 10, 15, 20 years in the military, and then they've joined the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. All that experience of all those conflicts and all those training exercises and all that money that the government have spent on them, and I mean NATO governments now, that doesn't go away just because you're in another country. All that experience is there, so that's the reality. Now, let me read you this is from, I'll put the link in the description, guys, okay? So this is according to Russian military doctrine stated in 2010. So this is not new to anyone. Nuclear weapons could be used by Russia in response to the use of nuclear, and other types of weapons of mass destruction against it or its allies, and also in case of aggression against Russia with the use of conventional weapons. So this means basically they can also use nuclear weapons when Russia's being attacked with conventional weapons, when the very existence of the state is threatened. So is the state of Russia being threatened right now? Well, yeah, they've lost ground. Not only have they lost ground, they've got enemy soldiers on their ground, taking down their flags and potentially putting up Ukrainian flags. So that, that's a tick in the box. Most military analysts believe that in this case, Russia would pursue an escalate to de-escalate strategy, initiating limited nuclear exchange to bring adversaries to the negotiating table, Russia will also threaten nuclear conflict to discourage initial escalation of a major conventional conflict. So what they're saying there, guys, is basically, well, I'll say it exactly, you know, if the very existence of the state is threatened, they'll use nuclear weapons. So ask yourselves this question: is the existence of the state of Russia being threatened? Well, you know, you kind of have got soldiers now in Russia tearing down flags and putting their own flags up potentially. And then they're looking at this escalate to de-escalate strategy, which would be basically a limited nuclear exchange to say, listen, guys, you know, we're willing to use these nuclear weapons if you guys don't get out of our country and don't come to the negotiating table. That's what they say, guys. I'll put the links in the description to this video. So that is literally, that's not me making it up. That's not me, you know, speculating. That's what they've said, and I will put the links in the description. So that's the, you know, that's the real risk we run with this situation in Ukraine. Now, closer to home, if you live in the United Kingdom, UK protests. Yeah. So it's been out on the news, you know, and I was reading the news this morning, and it said that, you know, you can be arrested now just for attending one of these protests. But that kind of isn't, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I'll tell you why. Well, let me read you what it says here, and I'll put the link in the description. Is it legal to protest in the United Kingdom? And the right to protest in England and Wales is protected under European Court Convention of Human Rights. However, it is important to know that this legal right only applies to peaceful demonstration, as does not extend to any acts of violence or damage caused during a protest. So it's kind of, yeah, I kind of understand what it means now. The problem is here, people can get arrested for attending a riot, which, you know, by the law, that's fair. The problem is, if you go to a protest and then that protest meets counter-protesters and then it turns violent and then you're involved in that, but you're not, you see where I'm going? But you're involved in that, but you didn't turn up to a protest, but you was just there watching it. You know, it becomes a very, you know, it becomes a really grey area. And I think this could, you know, you could start to see government overreach on, well, I think you're seeing government overreach anyway. But what I think you're going to see is the exploitation of government overreach in the, sorry guys, hang on. In the context that, imagine now, little old lady, or whoever, let's use a little old lady because we like little old ladies. Little old lady is upset with something that's happening in her community. You know, there's a planned protest, and she thinks, do you know what? That's not far away from where I live. I'm going to go down there and show my support. Little old lady's at the protest. She's protesting peacefully. You know, she's got a banner that she's made with cardboard and some, you know, some lovely colourful pens. You know, she's waving her banner. The next thing, you know, there's counter demonstrations turn up or whatever. You know, there's a thousand different scenarios. That protest then has, you know, turns violent. That little old lady is watching it. What is she supposed to do then? Is she supposed to turn away as soon as she sees violence? Is she supposed to run away? Is that the new law now? Okay, let's go with that. Who defines? Well, let me tell you what it said on here, and then we'll break it down a little bit. So it does not extend to any acts of violence or damage caused during a protest. Now, I think we all understand what violence is. And again, you know, violence, it's kind of a subject legal definition. We can argue violence on a lot of different, you know, we can talk about verbal violence, we can talk about military violence, or we can talk about physical violence. There's a lot of different definitions here. And I think the people of the United Kingdom, there needs to be some sort of definition, because I feel there really is going to be huge government overreach on this. Now, the next thing on this is damage. What do we mean by damage? Where are these definitions and who's making these definitions? And I think we just need more clarity in the United Kingdom onto under what circumstances you can get arrested, because that little old lady who's gone there, you know, So let's break it down even further. Little old lady goes to a protest. She knows that if there's damage to buildings or violence, then she can leave. Okay, then she has to leave under the law because she can get arrested just for watching. Okay. So little old lady's at the protest and, you know, counter protest, police, whatever, you know, and things start to escalate slowly. At what point is that qualified as violence? If somebody throws a bottle, okay. If the bottle didn't smash, is that still violence? If the bottle smashes, that's violence, okay. So what if somebody drops a bottle or a pint glass on the floor and smashes it by accident? Is that still classed as violence? Can she be arrested then? There's so many grey lines here, guys, all right? I don't understand them, and I'm not claiming to understand them. And that's kind of the problem. I feel this can be used for government overreach, but I think the real, what I think this legislation is really in place for is to stop people recording this. It's to stop people filming it and sharing it on social media and platforms like X, because I think that is the real thing that the government are worried about. I don't think they're worried about people stood there watching, on verbatim, but I think this is code for if you're there recording, you can get arrested. And guys, just think about that. If that is the case, and if this is what we see in the future, and I do think this is what could happen. Can you imagine now a situation where, and again, this is something you'd see in a totalitarian state, like China or something, where a protest starts, the police move in first, and before they deal with any of the protests, they make sure no one's filming. Can you imagine that, guys? All right. Can you imagine the absolute carnage that would cause? And again, unless you deal with the root causes of these problems, they're not going away. Those problems will just escalate and escalate and escalate. And like I said at the beginning of this video, guys, all right, if you've got a boiling pan and it's simmering and you want to stop it simmering, take away the heat. Don't put a pan on it. Don't put the lid on it and bolt it down. That is just going to make things so much worse, guys. All right. Anyway, guys, I have waffled on for far too long. I'm going to mag to grid now, guys, and I'll get you another video later on today.